Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night live and uncut podcasts for people who are lifelong learners. Tonight, I'm going to talk about two books that I've recently read. In fact, very recently. Number one, The Diary of a CEO by Steven Bartlett. And on Steven's podcasts, he talked about Professor Steve Peters, who's written his fourth manual on the psychology of performance, basically. And Steve has five degrees. He's a GP, and of course, he's the guy that trained Chris Hoy and the Sky Sports team to win the Tour de France, and also a number of football teams, as far as I know. So I'm just going to share my screen, which is coming up now. And perhaps, David, you can tell me as you're unmuted whether you can see the screen or not.
Yep, that looks good. Thanks.
Fantastic. And we'll talk about The Diary of a CEO, which I demolished in about 5 days with a highlighter pen, destroying it, putting notes in it, as my wife says, and coming up with a few tips. What I particularly liked this was that it tended to agree with my unconscious bias about training and tips and issues that I've read over the last 30 years, but brought up to date by Steven in this new book. I didn't see it much about A Diary of a CEO. I saw it about more about 33 laws of business and life. So he talks about 33 laws, but the first 3 laws that I hit were having 5 buckets to fill up and keeping them full in life. If you read about it, the real way to become a master, and you can't get into mastery, is unless you teach it, which we all know live on this podcast because we're all lifelong learners. But for people who are watching this on YouTube or listening to it, put yourself out there, teach your team, take a 5-minute time out and point out the points that you've learned when you've been talking to people. And ask, don't tell, another very obvious one, but he put a different spin on it, which I'll turn to now. So what Steve says is, fill up your bowls first. You cannot help others from empty bowls. And number one is knowledge. And keep your knowledge topped up, which the world's changing so fast in 2023, 2024. Knowledge is key, information's power, and with artificial intelligence moving at such a fast pace, with top podcasts becoming so popular, make sure you keep your knowledge and information topped up, which will of course increase your skills. You'll never be out of work, you'll never be not doing something if your skills are on the pace. And then having a big networking with people, putting yourselves out to build that network, to keep in touch with people, absolutely key. Keeping your resources there, the people that you know, using your resources, and of course keeping your reputation. And reputational risk is a big thing that most companies look at big time now. And this is why we encourage Monday Night Live, so that our knowledge base can be kept up, and which is why I've interviewed over 190 thought leaders with their ideas going over the last 3 years. Number 2, teach it. It was Yogi Bhajan who said, if you want to learn something, read about it. If you want to understand something, write about it. If you want to master something, teach it. You can't be a master unless you teach it. And those of us that have taught and have spent their lives teaching in different ways or lecturing in different ways, we know that you learn so much when you put your head above the parapet, get outside the box, and decide that you're going to pass this on to other people and teach it. And finally, the one I wanted, this is the one that hit me more than anything, ask, don't tell. Well, we know that, but influencing ours and other people's behaviors. So he uses the example of signs which say, please recycle, or ask the question, will you recycle? And then asking the question, will I eat vegetables today? Will I go to the gym today? And the point being that, I see I missed a question mark out off there. I should have got someone to check it, but didn't have time for that today as we were going live in 5 minutes time. Starting the question with will implies ownership. And I thought about that and I thought, will I stop procrastinating today and send those 10 emails out? And I thought, you can't help answering that question with a yes, because it's on your agenda. And therefore, if you do answer it with a yes, that's going to make a massive difference. So, Steven Bartlett, Diary of a CEO. I'm not selling it for him. I'm not pitching it for him. I don't even know the guy. Perhaps he ought to give me a credit for pitching his book for him unconditionally. Then we turn to Professor Steve Peters, the famous author that's been in the charts, the book charts for about 7 or 8 years with the Chimp paradox, who worked with Chris Hoy, several high-performing sports teams. He is a medical doctor, got 5 degrees, been a GP, been a psychiatrist, and now spends most of his life coaching and developing people and getting them away from that inner negativity, the thing that stops sports people and high achievers really achieving their goals. So let's have a look at some of the issues that I picked out at the beginning of the book. Number 1, the mind produces, as we know, thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. That's the mind operating system. But a lot of those thoughts and behaviors aren't unhelpful. They're defensive. They go back to when we lived in the jungle and we needed to protect ourselves from other people. In today, well, depending on where you live in the world, I guess, as we look at the news broadcasts, we don't need to worry quite as much as that. But those negative thoughts are unhelpful. So he talks about team 1, the chimp, the inner chimp, the person that keeps you safe, that talks to you quietly, but is usually pretty negative. Team 2, the human, and that's the stick figure that he draws in the book to keep it simple. The person that rationalizes things, thinks them through, and puts the input together with the chimp into the computer, which rationalizes it. So they're the 3 issues that run through the book: the chimp, the human, and the computer. Now that is such a huge way of simplifying the issues that I didn't buy into it till I read the beginning of A Path Through the Jungle, when he explains totally to us the way the brain really does work. And it's such a complicated system that simplifying it into 3, I can see how he's been so successful in dealing with negative thoughts in high achieving people and high achieving sports people. So we have an experience, and team 1, the chimp, interprets it by emotions. Team 2, the human, interprets it, the facts, by facts, and then emotional input and factual input go into the computer. And as I was writing this, I was thinking about it big time, and I was thinking about decisions that I have made or nearly made by the chimp, being bullied into it by a strong personality, being sold at by a salesperson who wants you to make a decision there, doesn't want you to go back and think about it overnight, as team 2, the human, would be, and input it into your computer so you can make a rational decision. And I'll ask you, how many decisions have you made on the spur of the moment, perhaps irrationally, because your emotions said, yeah, let's go for it, or somebody else has said, yes, let's go for it, when perhaps you shouldn't? It's very interesting thinking back to those issues. And the chimp and the human the basis for working is very different. The chimp works with logic and emotion, and the human works with logic and emotion. The difference is how we use them. And the reason Peter's talked about chimpanzees and the similar animals, they are the closest animals that have brains like us. So that's why he used the metaphor of the chimp. Now, the chimp's role is to focus on the problem, and the human's role is to focus on the solution. I'm going to bring David Skinner in a minute because he's done a lot more work on this than me. But back to the human, looks at things logically, analyzes the emotions, and takes action. But of course, the chimp sees things on an emotional basis first, and then maybe puts some logic into it and takes action. But you can see the pie would be much more emotional for the chimp, and we've all got a chimp inside us talking to us, making quick decisions. So, for example, if we were going to choose a meal, the human would say, logic says we should have a healthy option. The chimp says, I'd rather have that ice cream, even though the human knows perhaps it doesn't make sense. Going into the computer, you can take advice. Hello, my screen's taking off on its own. Let's go back to there. Yeah, got it. The human discussing a heated topic, which made me think about all those negotiations that I get involved in. The human says, let's find a solution. The chimp says, let's win an argument. Goodness me, all the wars that go on around the world that to go on are all about winning, aren't they, rather than finding a solution to the problem. I was talking to a pal of mine about what's going on this morning, and what is a solution to some of those issues where there's been wars going on for 2,500 years in the Middle East, and they're still going on. It's very interesting. In fact, the book Getting to Yes was written when the Harvard Business School went to look at how Palestine and Israel could come to a win-win agreement in the 1980s before they blew each other up, because the whole world would have been in a lose-lose situation. I expect some of the Harvard experts are working on it now. I certainly hope so. David, are you there to chip in with your thoughts on this, because I know you've studied Peter's more than I have? Perhaps David's not there.
I was on mute. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the book that you've been talking to, but the Chimp Paradox, and he's written another book called Silent Guides, which I actually found a little bit more useful. I mean, I think one of the things you've done brilliantly there, Derek, is articulate what a useful book the concept, the chimp, is in terms of giving us a language to talk about our behavior. And just before we were on, we were talking about certain situations, and it's so easy to intuitively just fall into the chimp human-computer language, and I think that's incredibly useful. It's very, very easy to use. And I mean, whatever you think about it, it's been hugely successful because people find it useful. It's intuitive. They can apply it to their own situation, and you can expand it. There's a couple of areas I feel I always have to get over my discomfort with it, which is probably more about me than it is about Steve Peters. The first is that I get pulled into thinking it's an anatomical description of how the brain operates, which really is irrelevant, because if it's useful, it doesn't matter quite what the reflection of the anatomy is. And I don't think it's very good in a description of how the brain works, because it's just constant. The brain is an interrelated set of systems, and you can't just pull it out to different modules and say that's how it works. Nevertheless, those systems, you can look at how your behaviors operate and categorize them, and I think that's quite useful for it. I don't like the way that he talks about you being the human and your chimp being something else, because to me, being human is about encompassing what he calls the human, the chimp, and the computer. And I think we should value all aspects of that. And our job is to make them balance and integrate so that we function effectively, which actually is, when you get down to what he's talking about, that's what he says. And he also says this isn't an anatomical description, it's just a functional description. So I think the terminology sometimes sucks people into thinking those things. And finally, I'm not particularly comfortable with the slightly adversarial approach that he has between how the different systems operate. One's trying to control another. I mean, he talks about the use of the rational human versus the irrational chimp. Well, if you read others, they'll say, well, the chimp, as he describes it, is incredibly rational, because if you're in front of a bear that's about to eat you, the most rational thing you can probably do is run away or climb a tree or whatever the right answer is. And equally, your rational thinking brain does some really, I've fallen into the trap, your cognitive thinking brain does a lot of very irrational things, like spending 24 hours a day browsing the internet for no good purpose. So it's not about one bit controlling another, it's about them all operating in balance and recognizing when they're not. So I think that's where he gets to in the end. And I can come up with 2 or 3 examples where I think he's got some really useful frameworks. I don't know, is that helpful, Derek?
Brilliant, David. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I was struck when the chimp paradox, which I'd had and read, looked at and given up on, was in every bookshop at number 1. And of course, I get it now, and that's thanks to that's thanks to Steven Bartlett and his podcast, which is interesting as well. So just moving on to finish off here. Here we go. I like this particular example. 2 tires have blown. This is the end of the world. We can see the chimp screaming and the rational driver, which is us, I guess. Let's form a plan of action. And the computer says, what's the plan? So team 1's the chimp. Team 2's the human. Team 3 is the computer. A vastly simple way of using a metaphor for this hugely complicated brain that we've got. But I remember Paul McKenna saying most people know how to program their DVD rather than they know how to program the computer. Well, of course, if you put garbage into your computer brain, you get garbage out. And if you read the Daily Mail every day, you'll be putting garbage in. And social media is exactly the same. So we're bombarded by rubbish. It depends on how we use our brain to pick up the information and make rational decisions on it rather than chimp decisions. Monday Night Live podcast from me, live and uncut interviews with thought leaders. Now I'd like to go down to Dorset to my pal Godfrey, who has been looking 1 or 2 of his books up, or 1 book up, which took him by surprise and really hit his hotspots. Godfrey, are you there?
I am here. I'm just waiting for a helicopter to fly over my garden, because I can't hear a word anybody's saying, but it'll be just 30 seconds.
Well, we can hear you, Godfrey. So
okay, that's great.
Good news.
Well, even better news, everybody. Derek actually phoned me at mid-morning coffee time, so I've had far more time to get something to share with you than I normally get from Derek. So thanks, Derek. I need to just set the context a little bit. So there are several of you here who, like me, had a career with Barclays. I had 25 years with Barclays and was lucky enough to end up at the end of that as a senior manager in risk management. I had about 120 staff in my team, and it was all good fun. But I decided that I would leave. I'd always had a hankering to run my own business. And it was only really when I left that I appreciated the fantastic training that I'd had in Barclays, both formally at the management training centres and informally on the job. And looking back, that was 25 years of fantastic training that I was given. And when I left to start my own business with another, we were financial investigators, private detectives, as many of you know. A lot of our clients were the high street banks. We worked for the top 50 law companies and so on. And in the end, we grew to 45 regional offices around the country. But I was on my own. It was quite a lonely place. And all my training was kicking in, dealing with staff and resources, premises, money, and so on. And I was looking for more help. And I came across a book that just struck the right chord with me. And I'd like to share that with you. And it focused really on the principles that I'd been brought up on, which were those management principles of leadership, communication, and motivation. And I needed a little bit more help to continue to grow our business. And I came across a fantastic book. Some of you may know it. It was written by Sir John Harvey-Jones, and I'll share his biography with you. And it was called All Together Now. And it struck a chord because this was a guy I respected who'd had a fantastic career, and he tried to keep things very simple. He had a very no-nonsense approach. So John Harvey-Jones was born in the 1920s. He went to Dartmouth Naval College as a naval cadet. By the age of 24, he was the commander of a submarine and had a very distinguished war career. When he came out after World War II, he went to Cambridge University and mastered Russian within 6 months.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
And he then was part of a team on a fishing boat in the North Sea and the Baltic, but it was a naval intelligence boat, although not to the outside world. And he worked for naval intelligence, gathering everything that we needed to know at the time about the Russians. So he had a fantastic grounding in leading men, and he clearly had a very sharp brain. He went on, as many of us will remember, to be chairman of ICI, the big conglomerate, which he was chairman of 6 years. And then latterly, towards the end of his career and life, he ran a very interesting program on BBC called Troubleshooters, where he would go in and offer really practical, down-to-earth help with companies that were struggling. So this was the sort of guy that I could relate to. And I read this book in 1995. I then listened to a debate he took part in at the Institute of Directors. And I'd like to share with you notes I made at the time, which I've only just read first time in 20 years, that I made, having read his book.
Where did you find those? Up in the loft?
And
in the loft now.
You know my filing system, Derek, and a précis of that debate. And like all good précis, it was half a side of A4 in bullet points. So I had condensed the book and the debate, and I am going to read a little bit, but it's very punchy. To be a good leader, not a manager, the 3 most important attributes are: have a vision, have good communication skills, and motivation skills. Remember, staff come first. He was right on my page, or I was on his. It is not necessary to have great innovation or imagination. Somebody else in the company is probably the ideas man. Harness all the staff's good ideas. It helps to have the following background. And wait for it, chaps. I went, woohoo! It helps to have a background in accountancy or banking. I went, phew, thank goodness for that. And it is important to have actually done the job on the shop floor. Don't ask your team to do anything that you have not done or would not be prepared to do. And finally, and this is where Derek said, come on, be as provocative as you dare. But the final thing I've written down here, and this is my typing 20 years ago, it is not necessary to have IT background or skills. And it is a complete waste of time to read a great number of management guru books. Do the job. And you can come back on me on any of that, but it just rang a bell with me. And for me, it's true today as it was 20 years ago. Thanks, Derek.
Well done, Godfrey. Thanks very much for that. It just shows you how the world changes, I guess, doesn't it? But I don't think anyone did read management books in those days, but they probably read his. He was probably one of the very first ones.
Yeah, he probably was. And there are some lessons out of there, aren't there, that good leaders do, and, action. Too much theory, you can talk and talk forever. In the end, you've got to plunge in and do it. And I learned that when we were starting our business from scratch with absolutely nothing. And you think of all the resources that it goes into building a business. At some point, you've got to roll your sleeves up and just do it. But staff are so crucial. If you're running a team, whether it's sport, in business, wherever it is the staff that are crucial to your success. So a lot of those points are as valid today as they were then.
Absolutely, Godfrey. No, thanks for that. It's interesting. I mean, I've always wondered how anyone can lead when they don't know how to do the job. And I mean that in the broadest sense, leading by example, knowing what you're doing. And the best leaders I know found out about the job and understood it and had a go at it in a way and learnt from that. Yeah, you are provocative, but that's great. Thanks for doing that. I'm going to stop the recording in a minute and then throw it open to questions. People share any books that they've read or any ideas or any podcasts. Now podcasts seem to be becoming more and more available. I've decided to call this a podcast rather than a YouTube video because I see other people do that now. So podcast is becoming that generic word, I think, like VHS. That woke me up last week. It's funny how things change. Anyway, Monday Night Live, thanks Godfrey for joining us. David, thanks for joining us. Questions please in the chat box, and see you next week.